to get us started in this section of the program, I'm very, very excited indeed. We've got some very big hitters coming up to hand over to an impressive group of change makers, disruptors, for their reflections on the way forward. Richard Louis from MSNBC is with us to help steer these important discussions. So Richard, over to you.
Thank you, sir.
Be generous, come on. Yes. Richard.
And a very good day to all of you, and thanks for being here. We have an exciting panel coming up with some big brains to give us some ideas about how to imagine. Right, Lisa? That's what we're going to do. We're going to imagine. So first off, if you could please give a warm welcome to a very good friend of all of ours, and that is the Executive Director of UN Women, Ms. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Good to see you, as always. And we have Mr. Paul Polman, Chief Executive Officer of Unilever. Keep your microphone with you. We'll need it. And Abby Maxman, President and Chief Executive Officer of Oxfam America. These are nice pillows, aren't they? These are really, I mean, I want to take one of these home.
Comfortable.
Are they comfortable as well?
For big guys like me.
So in this conversation, I would like to emphasize, not only because I work in cable news, but also because, please interrupt as you like. And I'm sorry, Madam Executive Director, you've been through this before with me. You know how it goes. So please, by all means, as we go through this conversation, I'd love to hear your spontaneous reactions. We're going to start with a very important topic here, and that is, as we think of the blueprint for business on the SDGs, and we think again of how to imagine a world, right? And the ideas that might pop up from this, the importance of the seats that all of you hold are so important in driving not only where these ideas come from, but the ideas themselves and the implementation thereof. So I'd like to ask the same question of all of you, and if you can, tell me, what, from your perspective, what does your transformational solution look like? What does it look like? Madam Executive Director.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm going to cite two critical issues that I'm very preoccupied with right now. One is girls' education, because I think education is the closest thing we have to a silver bullet that would solve many of the problems that we are addressing now, even before they happen. And the way technology is now, we actually have solutions to offer universal access to education for every child, everywhere, no matter who they are, free of charge, with high quality content. What we need is to pull the moving parts together and stabilize them. As long as the child has a device, and as long as we can globally work out on how we lower the cost of broadband, we can change the world. But we need political will and commitment to make that happen. So we are working across the board as UN Women with UNESCO and others, with tech companies, with governments, and young people are sitting on us here because they want a solution. That is one. Another critical one for me, for women, the next 1 billion people that are going to be connected to the internet, 75% of them have to be women and girls, because right now the trend is that the gap between men and women who are connected is widening. So we have to turn that trend around, because women lost out in the Industrial Revolution. We shouldn't lose in the digital revolution. So those are the two things, amongst many other things, that I'm preoccupied about.
Those are great, great ideas. To you, Paul, my friend.
Well, the main change of the Sustainable Development Goals, and by the way, we've made enormous progress. We shouldn't feel miserable about it, but what is very clear is that although we all agree on the direction we need to go, we are certainly not scaling it fast enough, and having as a result, with the speed and scaling, don't have the impact in the 15 years that we need. So Goal number 17 is around partnership, but it's very important to understand what partnership, because this is where the big breakthrough comes from. We're all in this room being lucky bunches because we can be here tonight, today. We made it past the age of 5. We have enough to eat at night, not to worry about going to bed hungry. Our children don't die before the age of 5 of simple infectious diseases that can be avoided. We all got good education, but we only belong to the 2% of the population. So the real breakthrough comes from us understanding that our purpose of being here is to put ourselves to the service of others. So if you belong to the lucky 2%, you've won the lottery. So you have to give yourself to the service of the others. So that's the moral leadership we need to implement the SDGs. Obviously, when implementing the SDGs, there will be bottlenecks, there will be setbacks, there will be skeptics, there will be cynics in any change process. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here. So it needs that courageous leadership. And that is where I think the biggest breakthrough comes from people that understand that putting the interest of others ahead of their own is actually in their own self-interest. I define sustainability very simple nowadays. That is that people put the interest of their children and their grandchildren ahead of their own personal greed. If we can get the world there, because after all it's an issue of morality more than anything else, I think we have an opportunity to accelerate the Sustainable Development Goals. For that reason, I always say we need more leaders and trees. Thank you.
In that order?
In that order.
In that order, in that order. But Paul, give me something tangible, a little bit more farther down from, because that's a great way to start. Give me a transformative idea that's maybe at 10,000 feet.
Oh, no, I can bring it down to any feet, because at the end of the day,
10 feet. 10 feet. 10
at
feet.
the end of the day, you have to implement it on the ground with the people.
You know well.
And this is a plan of people, planet, obviously, partnership, prosperity, and now I'm forgetting the other piece. Peace, which is the most important one. Governance and rule of law, goal number 16. Thanks, Phumzile. So you see the food chain. I'm always appalled, and that is why I'm enthusiastic about the food chain, for example. If you come from Mars and you enter on planet Earth for the first time in life, in your history, you think that we're a kind of idiots. You know, we have, the way we grow agriculture is by cutting down the lungs of this world, which are the forests. We're producing it in a totally unsustainable way and having degradation. We have the issues of stunting and malnutrition on that side. We have the audacity to waste 30–40% of the food. Now more people are dying of obesity than actually of malnourishment. We've just arrived at that point. Congratulations. And in between, we do all the other things that totally don't make sense. So there are a lot of people that are very passionate about the food chain, but they work in the different elements. So we've created and actually launched this week the Food and Land Use Initiative, where we put all the great organizations that work on this, put them all together to work on the total value chain, the famous P of partnership. Now, with a very simple objective, how do we feed 9 billion plus people? Because if we like it or not, that's what we have to deal with. How do we ensure that we do that sustainably, not stealing from future generations? I mean, it's bizarre to me that this planet has been around for 5 billion years, but we as this generation have the audacity to do more damage to this planet in the last 50 years than in the previous 5 billion years. So how do we do this sustainably is point number 2. And the third one is equally important, the 500 million smallholder farmers. How can we measurably ensure that we improve their livelihoods? So working this across the value chain is an incredibly energizing idea, and obviously the work has started, and I think for the first time we can see a breakthrough happening in the total food chain at a moment, frankly, that all the governments in the G20 and the G8, appallingly may I say, don't even have food security on the agenda anymore. So again, a wonderful opportunity, I think, to address some of the Sustainable Development Goals. My last point would be, the reason I'm passionate about food and the way we designed the Sustainable Development Goals is that they're actually interrelated. Phumzile, very passionate about goal number 5 of gender equality, which is women more than anything else, but women runs through all of the goals, and rightfully so. But you won't achieve it if you only focus on goal number 5. You need to look at all of the goals and put women first. And the same thing is with food, it goes through all of the goals. If you don't feed people, then they won't go to school. If they won't go to school, they don't have the education. The women and girls are often more affected by that. You cut down the forest, you talk about the goals on land use or oceans. So all these goals are interrelated, and that's why I like it. I tried to convince Trump to stay in the Paris agreements. It's one of my many failures in life that I didn't succeed. That's why I'm sitting here, to confess the failures to you. But when you talk...
You know, on this stage, this is where he gave his speech when he was first elected.
Well, I'm glad I wasn't there.
This is the stage. This is the room. This is the room.
So, but should we stay here?
Should we stay here? That's...
But my point is, seriously, is that if you talk to him about having people not go back hungry and how that links to security, or how people are moving around the world, the biggest migration moves that we now have, driven by weather pattern changes and many other things. If we talk about the devastating effects of taking livelihoods away from people by cutting down forests and losing 3% of biodiversity, if you talk to him about the fact that we are spending today 9% of the global GDP just to deal with conflict prevention and wars, whilst an implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals only require 3% of GDP, you'll get actually his attention. So the beauty of looking at it more integrated is that there is a role to play for all of us to making it come alive. Your turn.
All right, Abby, we'll stay. For a second, I thought you were in the U.S. Senate, but I wasn't sure. I'm joking. If you can't, stay cruising at 10 feet. That was great. Nice, meaty stuff there. Transformative idea here to help us imagine.
Well, it's helpful to start with that. I like the idea of a transformational solution. But I think we're not looking for one big, sexy idea. We're actually looking for some of the things that are being talked about. And I want to applaud and appreciate the Global Compact for bringing business leaders to the table on the SDGs, because we will only be able to realize the aspirations of the SDGs with our individual and collective leadership and action. And I think the leadership piece is critical. And so while that might not sound new or transformational per se, it's absolutely critical. And so it's the will, if you will, the leadership and the will. And we all know that when CEOs and executive boards decide to put creative energy and organizational capital behind a goal, it unleashes the innovation and drive to get there. Beginning the SDG agenda and bringing it into the heart of corporate strategy and commitment is really the #1 issue. And when business leaders move from the question of whether to how, it happens. There are a few other things to look at as well. Second is to go about it in a holistic way, and the SDGs provide a framework or a scaffolding for that to happen. It can't be tangential or separate. It has to be core to business practice, and that goes to the heart of it, and how businesses operate, and looking holistically and across the SDGs and the framework. And third, and it's already been said, it's about applying the considerable experience that's out there and that is in the power of companies and businesses in measurement towards progress. And we need measurement that is comparable, reliable, and accessible to all stakeholders. Yeah. So those necessarily individually don't sound transformational per se, but collectively they are really essential to making a real difference and impact.
As you've been talking, Abby, with different businesses about this very objective, if you've been thinking about obviously being transformational, there's also this idea of success, right? And when you put success criteria out there, and you know, folks in business like to lay out those success criteria very clearly, and the KPIs, and we can go on these very topics. When you think of the 5 leadership qualities, what stands out to you in terms of the difficulty that businesses are facing in this discussion as they try to bring in the SDGs, and what is that answer that you've given to them?
Well, the difficulty, I think, the importance of CEO will is huge, but I know it's not so simple as that. There's big companies, there's different drivers and accountabilities that leaders face in bringing their organizations and companies along. But the requirements of, I like the intentional, consistent accountability, ambitious, collaborative principles are absolutely key. But there is more, and increasingly business leadership on the SDGs goes well beyond the tough job of running a successful and sustainable business. It really means taking on broader societal problems, and such as defense of human rights and democratic freedoms, even if they don't affect directly the immediate business operations. And we all have an interest in open, stable, and well-functioning markets. That's core, and business can no longer stand on the sidelines while essential democratic institutions are under threat. And so I think that represents a real challenge, but an important space where business can stand up and stand with civil society and speak up and speak out and hold governments accountable.
And Madam Executive Director, I've seen you and Paul sit next to each other many a time for at the building, at UN Women together.
We actually like each other.
Yes, you like each other. And yes, any of you at the He for She event yesterday? Well, that's okay, because I'm sure it's recorded and you can watch it. I was there yesterday, and when we talk about 10 by 10 by 10, which is bringing in business, bringing in institutional support for gender equality, when you think of the discussions you've had with businesses, discussions you've had with Paul along the years and time, what is it that you think that businesses can do that's worked really well? You've had these discussions for years now about what you'd like to accomplish with gender equality.
Yeah, well, I've now learned that in business, you have to talk to the CEO so that you don't go from post to pillar. You get the top person to set the tone, and it makes it very easy to work with everybody else. So He for She, which is a program that we have, and I encourage you to join. It's for men who want to stand for gender equality. And if you are in a position of authority, we require you to use that position to make changes in the universe that you are in. So these He for She leaders, which include Paul, have identified areas where they can make changes in their companies, and they are driving the change for themselves. So it is so nice to me that now and again I can call Paul to come and account to me. I mean, can you imagine how empowering it is? And he has to put it in writing. Dear Phumzile, da. This is what I've done. So every year on the 20th of September, we receive feedback from the companies that have volunteered to put data about their companies in front of everybody on gender parity and on equal pay. Most of them, that is the areas that they are working in. And every year they give us feedback about how far they have come. And yesterday was one of those days when they had come together and they were making presentation, sharing problems also where they feel they're not doing well. But PwC, for instance, who chose to work on parity, moved from the time we started to work with them in 2016 from about 13% of women in top leadership. They are now at 48%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. And they were explaining how that happened. We are working, amongst others, with Unilever on addressing gender-based violence in some of the plants that they work in. And again, we are working with the women in the plants, we are working with their teams.
Right.
And then we have to track with them what is happening, is it decreasing, what has worked, and that information we get to share with other companies as well.
The data must be very empowering for you to hear that. I mean, 48% from 13%.
Absolutely, very, very encouraging. We're working with Vodafone on facilitating access to education for girls, using mobile technology to deliver high quality learning materials for girls in refugee camps. Syrian refugees who are studying on the run and can connect everywhere they are and continue with their studies.
How do you do, but just between the two of us, how do you get these CEOs to come on board? Do you?
I ask nicely.
You ask nicely? Really?
I'm a very nice person, actually.
Yeah.
You know, you will never know if you don't ask, but also you must persist.
Yeah. So you ask them 20 times.
I ask nicely and I persist. So there are a lot of nice people in the private sector.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I think that's tweetable. That might be tweetable, I think.
That's quite a quote.
Paul, how did you come around to say, yes, this is right for me as CEO, this is right for my organization, I am going to step up, I am not only for number 5, but for all of them, as you decided to engage?
Well,
other than Phumzile coming after you.
No, that's okay. We do it in different ways between us. But the first thing is really if you want to have this society function, it starts with dignity and respect for everybody. So some people might have that moral case, but to get more CEOs involved, which we are obviously trying to do, to get the critical mass to move the change, you have to make the business case if you like it or not. And we happen to have a gender balanced board, but gender balanced boards, companies that have that, have a better financial result. Companies that better reflect the diversity of the population within that total organization have a better financial result. People that are better connected in their value chain to all of the global citizens and treat them with that respect and dignity, all of them have a better return. Mohamed Yunus has shown, and we have shown in many studies in our value chain, that if we invest in women, we actually get a higher return. So if you talk the economic case, that's probably the better way of doing it. I want to come back to another topic very quickly on the challenge of business and what business has to do to get into the SDGs in its broader context. Because it's not easy out there. The economies aren't quite functioning the way it should be functioning. Inequality is on the increase. We see the pressures of planetary boundaries. Technology is going to disrupt all of us and confusing us every day. So lots of businesses have more on their plates than they've had at any time in the history of mankind. And if you like it or not, the ones who lead the companies right now are probably at the crust of one of the biggest transformations that is needed to make this world function for everybody. Look at this for a second. We need to move from a linear consumption model to a circular consumption model. Otherwise, this thing doesn't happen, it doesn't function anymore, running out of resources and all the effects. We need to decarbonize our global economy. We need to change our financial system from the shorter term to the longer term. We need to find a way to make our growth more inclusive, because at the end of the day, increasingly, it's actually less inclusive. And then finally, all that needs to happen at a moment that, frankly, global governance is broken. So you can all sit here and blame your politicians, but then you're going to explain it to your children and their grandchildren. So that's not really the answer. So increasingly, business has to be up there and help de-risk the political process. As Abby rightfully was saying, business cannot be a bystander in a system that gives them life in the first place. Now, I have never met any CEO who wants more unemployment. I've never met any CEO who wants more people to die from air pollution. I've never have met any CEO who, there are some, but that think that we shouldn't all have the same chances, the same rights, opportunities, and skills in life to succeed. So people are basically good people. And if we don't believe in the goodness of people, we shouldn't be around here in the first place. So then the question is, why don't we behave that way? And the answer really is that our behaviors are influenced by the boundaries that are put upon us. And the bigger breakthroughs that we get as companies is for sure to get your CEO on board, for sure to get the board behind you. If you don't have those two things, you're actually getting more frustration than action. For sure, work it in your own company, and then the value chain, and then more transformative initiatives with the whole industry. These are the normal change processes that the Global Compact can help you with. But the bigger changes are going to come if we move these boundaries. How do we move the financial market to the longer term? Unfortunately, this world puts more emphasis on the next quarter than the next generation. So if we don't change that, we can't run our businesses properly. The second thing is, how do we value environmental and social capital? If we only as capitalists, because there's nothing wrong with capitalism, but if you only ask capitalists to optimize the return on financial capital, then that's what capitalists do. And some people are darn good at it. Unfortunately, very few, and they get better at it and better at it. But if you ask a capitalist to optimize the return not only on financial capital, but also on social and environmental capital, they're the best place to handle the challenges. So fight for a price on carbon. Look at what it means to support the Ruggie framework in your total value chain and build those things into your business models. The blueprint that Lisa was just talking about, that the Global Compact has put out in terms of how do you implement it in your organization, is tremendously powerful. It will build your reputation, it will attract employees, it will increase loyalty. You'll find opportunities to save costs, but more importantly, you see the bigger opportunities arriving to grow your business. Just the Sustainable Development Goals alone. At a time when interest rates are zero in big parts of the world, when I would argue we have too much money that we know what to deal with, we finally, in the absence of global governance, have a moral framework that tells us how we can run the world with probably the biggest opportunities that we have. Just unlocking the SDGs is an opportunity of $12 trillion as a minimum for an investment of $3 to $4 trillion. Well, any business person with a common sense, with elementary school education would go for that. We're at the point now that for any goals, not acting is actually costing us more than acting. The cost of climate change now this year, congratulations humankind once more, will be the highest cost in natural disasters that we've had as long as we've been on this planet. And you know, Trump might not say I'll pay into the 100 billion green climate fund, but he sure has to dish out more than 100 billion now in Florida and Texas. So we see in all of the elements of the Sustainable Development Goals and smart businesses that it's better to act, that it's actually cheaper to act. Making your value chains green, making your sourcing sustainable, having a human rights standards in your value chain that makes sense. And in all of these elements, be it food and land use, be it cities, be it energy, be it transportation, be it health and well-being, you have the biggest investment opportunities that you've ever had in the history of mankind. It's a good time to be born, actually.
Abby, if you can, reflect on what has been said by both Phumzile as well as Paul here in the idea of getting CEOs on board and governance. You brought up governance and how CEOs should, might, will approach those that they need to report to their boards.
Well, there's some things that, concrete actions that I think CEOs can take with their senior management and their boards, and looking at using the SDGs as a lens to examine their own footprint, if you will, of not just where they're trying to do good in a few areas, but really understanding where they might not be and potentially doing harm. And I think there's some important reflection spaces that can be taken using the SDGs and as a framework. Another area is important is to avoid cherry picking the SDGs that that might maximize profits, but actually look across and the actual commitment to seeing and working through the lens of all of them. I think the business case is clear, and I think how one mobilizes that over and over. We know we have data that spans decades, as Phumzile was saying, when women and girls are involved in the human economy at the local level, how decisions are being made at the family level, at the community level, that families and communities are healthier and wealthier, and we know that when that's happening, that's a good business foundation within which to work. So there's some very common sense approaches that taking the time and the consideration to, as a leadership in a company, is really an important opportunity. One other area I want to talk about is that we know that the vital role of governments in fulfilling the SDGs is key, and that the SDGs themselves will fail if governments don't have the revenue they need to build schools, hospitals, roads, and enforce the rule of law. And that gets into the uncomfortable topic of corporate tax practice. And being serious about the SDGs means viewing taxes as not simply a cost to be minimized, but an investment in stable, well-functioning, people-centered, human economies. And so I think that means being willing to commit to less aggressive tax practices, greater transparency, and playing an active role in reshaping legal frameworks that promote profit sharing and shifting and other forms of tax avoidance.
Great, and we do have about 5 minutes if any of you might have a question. We have a couple of mics, which I will open up in a second, but I do have another question, and that's about working together. And working together, and how, and I'll start with you again, Madam Executive Director, how is that you bring brains like these two together to sit next to you when you go and approach various key stakeholders that you're trying to bring on board. Tell us about collaboration and a scenario where that worked very well for you.
Well, let me just take a very urgent issue to address: forced marriage of children who are being forced to marry men they don't know who are old enough to be their fathers. We actually need leaders to take a stand. So not just UN Women, other UN agencies, a lot of civil society that we collaborate with for advocacy to bring the issue to the attention of decision makers. We have now brought in private sector also to support us. Just finished a session with Jack Ma, who has hardly been to Africa but is helping to invest with us to fight child marriage in Malawi. In Malawi itself, we collaborate with traditional chiefs, we collaborate with parliamentarians, and we especially with the education system and all actors in education, because education is the biggest cure to child marriage. Keeping the girls at school helps us to know where they are.
Right.
And to track them. And I can actually see that in different countries where we're able to pull these partnerships and everybody watches the space that they are in.
Right.
So that we work seamlessly, we are beginning to turn the corner, but the numbers are still staggering.
They are staggering. And I was just doing a story on child marriage in Nepal, and an amazing collaboration between Plan International and the government there, where they're monitoring the borders together and actually giving some of that responsibility to the NGO itself.
Just in Nepal itself, Chaudhry Foundation, which is a foundation of a business entity, is actually helping us in Nepal to collate data so that we know where the girls are. Because the fact that in some countries the girls are not accounted for, they don't have birth certificates, when they disappear, they just never existed. So having birth certificates, having the data to collect, and then monitoring so that if a girl doesn't show up at school, doesn't come for vaccination, someone must ask questions about where is she?
And that, I was interviewing one, she did not know her birth date. She did not have a birth certificate. She did not know from whence she came. So that's going to be so important. Great idea.
MasterCard is helping us to drive the registration of births so that, again, we close this gap of girls that are unaccounted for. We're doing that in Nigeria and in Egypt.
Fantastic. Paul, as you have, as a leader, as a CEO, you brought along other leaders. And how does that work together when you're bringing along other CEOs together, that power you have together?
Yeah, so the good thing is I was just in Nepal. I'm listening to your conversation about 2 weeks ago. And there's this lady, she runs an organization called Maite. It's worth going to. It's all the girls being in the sex trade and all the consequences of that, AIDS and little children and all that. She created this home and has now thousands of girls there who are rejected by their families and whatever, their villages. And she educates them, brings back the dignity and respect and gets them back into society. And she's been doing that for 25 years. To me, she was a Mother Teresa. But what I was most pleased to hear about was that Nepal is one of the few countries there that if they catch these people in the sex trade, they go to prison for 15, 20, 25 years. And that's probably the best thing you can do, in my opinion, because many of these governments don't enforce these things, and these practices by simple greed perpetuate. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
That's right.
So we deliberately built this goal number 17 on partnership for the common good to go far together. I mean, we have only come so far because we've worked in our own little territories. So if we don't start to build a higher level of trust, which has to come from transparency, which then ultimately is this basis of prosperity, we have to work together. We have to say to governments, you have to work with the private sector, we have to get civil society involved, and it's in these partnerships that you get the biggest breakthroughs all over the world. Now, when do these partnerships work best? If there's a common purpose, That's no question about that. Define very well in the beginning what you set out to achieve and be aligned on that. Often that doesn't work. They say, well, let's work with UN Women, but it's not exactly clear what it is about. So have your common purpose very clearly defined. Then secondly, be very clear who does what. You take, for example, with UN Women, or with Oxfam or whatever, what is your role, what is our role? And be clear that we respect those roles. And then the third thing is be very clear on what the output is and hold each other accountable. Measure and report that. We had many issues in our value chain, as you can imagine, with 80,000 suppliers, hundreds of thousands of subcontractors, which these suppliers then use again. We can have the best standards in the world, but I cannot sit here and guarantee that we don't have child labor in our value chains. So with Oxfam, we say go to Vietnam, we take these high-risk countries and do an independent audit of the value chains. We actually publish that. A lot of companies would not do that. But interestingly, we don't get attacked. We say, hey, that we are being applauded for it because these issues are made transparent and people can see how difficult it is for any individual organization to solve that by themselves. Oxfam couldn't do it by themselves, nor can Unilever do it by themselves. So it's in these partnerships that we get the breakthroughs, and my food and land use example, I think, talked enough about that.
Great. Abby talked about a collaboration. He said, wow, it just worked out so well. This is exactly what we need to do for the Global Compact. This fits exactly with the blueprint and trying to imagine something transformational.
Well, I'd like to talk about the blueprint itself and the compact, and I think there's an intent behind them and a recognition. If we have the SDGs and people talk, they're so ambitious, actually they're not. They are where they need to be for the world and where we need to be in 2030. And the compact itself, the premise on which it was designed, was a recognition of number 17, partnership, of the business sector commitment and the interconnectedness of how we will realize those. So the partnership and collaboration that it's premised on is enormous. In terms of Oxfam, we've been asked, and I've been so encouraged by companies who want us to be a critical friend, to the example you were giving. And we need it too. We need to understand where we can engage, connect, leverage both with our peers and with civil society, and also government. And so there's the interdynamic and intersecting relationship between business, private sector, if you will, civil society, and government, and we all have an invaluable role to play. But it is the together piece that's going to make us realize the ambitions.
And so that you can speak the same language. Any questions? I got a question over there. I think we have a microphone that'll run your way somehow. Right over here on my left. There we go. There he is. Okay. Well, here, take the mic. Why not? We're recording everything. I'm joking. Yeah.
So, David Wilcox, Reach Scale. Every session you go to, at every conference, at every meeting, in every building in this city is going to mention scale. And yet we don't have a single continentally scaled social enterprise. We don't have a single globally scaled social enterprise. In 1955, the World Food Program arranged for about $200 million worth of milk product and butter oil to be delivered to India for a group called Amul. Using producer cooperatives, they've created a $4 billion organization with 85% of the money going to the farmers. That's the kind of scale we need. So the question is, how do we stop individual companies doing individual things with individual social efforts when we know those won't scale? How do we get the best scale opportunities, and Reach Scale, my network, identifies those globally. How do we get the best scale opportunities in the world with groups of companies scaling groups of the best of best? And we're actually assembling a best of best social enterprises in India that will scale together. What we need is the groups of companies to join that effort. And each effort, no matter what you do, no matter how you run the numbers, every scale effort will start at a base of around $25 million.
Great. Great question. Any other questions? I'm going to do a twofer. Anybody on this side? Way over there. and then we'll let our panel react to both questions. Hand up in the air over there. So go ahead and stand up so she can see you too.
Thank you. My name is Kafui Amega from Ghana. And then I want to relate my question to on the issue of child marriage. From Ghana, where I come from, especially from the northern part, child marriage, as was really explained to, comes up about in the issues of poverty from the families, and sometimes with the tradition that goes with it, because the families cannot take care of the children, and especially the girls that they have. Behind the scenes, they just push them in to men who have money to be able to come back and take care of their children. So sometimes you would want to really look at how it is going to be able to work against it, but it becomes difficult, especially with what we do as a microfinance. You look at the less privileged and try to bring them up by giving them some monies to the women or the families, especially the women group that we deal with, that doesn't have the money to do. But you realize that a lot of them are doing this unnoticed. So as hard as you push, you still could realize that it's still going on unnoticed because of tradition and custom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And to our panel, I got the red light here, but I want all of you to react here. We have the issue of scale, we have the issue of child marriage and microfinance, and the economics on a local level. Who would like to start?
Well, I'm starting on child marriage because I hear what Kofo is saying, and I'm really, something is boiling in me. Because the guy has a lot of money, does he have the right to marry a child? Why doesn't he spend his money to help the family get out of poverty? Unilever has a lot of money. Do we give all of our people children to get married to and use our money that way? No, we use our money to make this a better world. So if someone is wealthier than someone else and someone is in need, then figure out with some moral standards, at least at the minimal level, how you can get these people little food that they need, how you can build them a toilet, how you can get their children in school. It's absolutely no excuse for child marriage. If that is how we run the world, I certainly don't want to be part of that. So that's exactly the main thing that we need to change. And that's why what Phumzile is saying, education is so important, so that people don't get in that type of reasoning and start accepting that type of reasoning. Irrespective of anywhere in the world you are or what your culture is, there is one common value that I think permeates all religions and all cultures, which is very simply do unto others what you want to have done unto yourselves. Now, on the question there, very quickly, on scaling, etc. I understand what you're saying. First of all, don't stop any individual effort of any individual company or any individual person, for that matter, to do what they like to do. Let 1,000 flowers bloom, because we have a big opportunity or a big challenge ahead of us. But at the same time, I hear what you're saying, that is we need to scale and scale faster. The best thing that happens with this is actually getting your industries aligned. You take the consumer goods industry, which is $4 to $5 trillion of consumer goods sales. We brought all the big players together of this consumer goods forum, big retailers and big manufacturers. And together we said, we stop selling soy, beef, paper, pulp, from palm oil, from deforestation. Together we said, these are the minimum human rights standards in our value chain. So that is very important. The third thing that we need to work on in terms of scaling it up is the financial markets. Unfortunately, the financial markets don't work because the governments and ODAs is about 150 billion in this world. The implementation of the SDGs is 3 to 4 trillion. We need to find ways to leverage the 150 billion, not by giving aid, but by taking risks away to make the financial markets work, to unlock the billions to invest in what you are saying. For example, in your example in India, how can you ensure that no coal plants are being built anymore, but everything would be green energy, would be in the best interest of India and the world? It's the financial markets that we need to make work. So getting not only the financial markets to be interested, but moving to alternative vehicles like blended financing, etc., is probably the best opportunity that we have. So keep going on your individual levels, try to make your value chain and industry associations leverage for scale, and then actually start to move these financial markets, where, as I said, we have to get out of this myopic focus on the short term to the longer term.
I also want to, on the issue of scale, to go back to the issue of collaborative leadership rather than competitive leadership, that sometimes people that are trying to solve the same problem are more inclined, in some cases, not always, to compete rather than to collaborate, so that we take the idea that gives us the best results and we all put our resources together to support that idea. I think sometimes the overemphasis on promoting one's brand tramples the things that we are trying to achieve together. So we have to find a way in which we obviously don't deny people the visibility that they may need when they make a contribution, but not to make that such a driver that we cannot even support someone else's good idea because it is someone else's idea.
Right.
We just did something like that recently. Unilever is part of that, something that we call the Unstereotype Alliance, where we've put together marketing and advertising companies together to address the issue of stereotyping women in advertising and marketing. Now, there is no one who competes like people who do advertising and marketing.
That's right.
And the fact that we've brought Unilever and Procter & Gamble together to work on a same purpose is truly something that is about collaboration. And that's what is giving us scale. That you've got these many really big companies. Your advertising budget is $9 billion a year.
Yeah, we don't like to talk about that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Nobody can hear. That's okay.
So
Yeah,
that's a significant amount. I mean, can you imagine a little UN women trying to address the issue of stereotype with our 2 cents against these guys?
yeah.
You help them to collaborate. Google, Facebook, they are all in that alliance. AT&T, for them to pull together their muscle so that they help us to address this issue of stereotypes. So
Fantastic.
I think that is scale and that is collaboration.
That's a great idea. And Abby, final word to you, and before they give me the hook here, 60 seconds to you.
Well, thanks. I think the question of scale can't just be a blunt instrument look through of what scale means. I mean, scale is about creating the enabling environment for innovation, for good practices to happen, to be able to measure and have visibility about what is happening so that we can see how we're having contribution of good practice and profitability and above all, a healthy, prosperous human economy that's working for everybody. So I would like us to look at scale in a different, more diverse way of what that can offer.
Thank you, Abby
Join the
Maxman.
Global Compact, for the ones who haven't joined, is the best contribution you can make today to add to the scale.
How about that, Lisa? Huh? You love that one, huh? All right. Okay, Abby, thank you so much. Paul as well, and Madam Executive Director. Thank you all three.